The financial bailout, passed by Congress, vociferously denounced by some members of the House in both parties across the political spectrum, but supported by John McCain and Barack Obama, has so far failed to quell the turmoil in the financial markets, staunch foreclosures and bankruptcies, or stem job losses, which saw us shed 160,000 jobs last month and 750,000 jobs since the beginning of this year. To what extent is the bailout and the collapse of our economy an indictment of our ruling elites on both sides of the political spectrum? And does it presage a kind of political and moral collapse? And is there a link between the economic collapse and the inability to cope with natural disasters, to provide a decent public education for our young, missteps in foreign affairs, the failure for an adequate health care program, and certainly the protection of our constitutional rights? To what extent is this collapse reach beyond economics and become a kind of moral or social collapse within the country? And maybe you'd like to begin, Mr. Baldwin.
Yeah, this $700 billion bailout, which is just the first installment, it's already over $1 trillion. I read in USA Today that many more installments are in store. We don't really know how deep this is going to go. To me, this is a fraud perpetrated against the American people. I would personally hope that any of the congressmen that voted for it would be voted out of office on November the 4th by their constituents back home. I can't imagine those that call themselves conservatives, those that call themselves constitutionalists, that they could possibly support the socialization of our financial system, which is exactly what this is. I think we have to go back to 1913 when our country decided at that point in time to forfeit constitutional law relative to economics and forfeit sound money principles. They created this institution that we now know as the Federal Reserve, which is a private institution of international bankers, some of whom we don't even know who they are, most of whom are not citizens of the United States of America, but have created, in my judgment, the greatest fraud and hoax on the American people in the history of our country. And I really believe that what we are seeing now is simply the chickens coming home to roost. There's people like Ron Paul, by the way, whom I supported during the primary season, and I'm so thankful that Ron Paul endorsed me for president here just a few weeks ago.
Let's stop it there. Give it to Mr. Nader.
Well, this is basically the last enactment of the collapse of corporate capitalist ideology. There are two ways corporations provide symbolic credibility for themselves. One is that they're patriotic. They supply arms for our wars. And the second is that they bear the risks of market failure. And therefore they have to be meritorious or they go under. Well, first of all, they've lost their patriotism. Their giant corporations have no allegiance anymore to our country other than to control it or ship its industries and jobs to fascist and communist dictatorships. And second, unlike small business, where the remnants of capitalist principles prevail, they're free to go bankrupt. These giant corporations go to Washington for a bailout. But it's the worst kind of bailout. It's a bailout that's very vague, has no standards, doesn't have re-regulation, doesn't have anything for preventing home foreclosures. It doesn't have anything to give shareholders more power to control the company they own and restrain the bosses. And it doesn't have anything for criminal prosecution of the crooks or making the speculators pay for their own bailout with a tiny 0.1% tax on $500 trillion of derivative transactions this year, which has produced $500 billion. Franklin Delano Roosevelt had a stock transaction tax, and we financed part of the Civil War. We've got to bring it back. That's the Nader Gonzalez platform on this bailout when Congress comes back in January. They've got to do these things.
Let's open this up for 5 minutes, and I want to begin by asking both of you, the idea of the free market in many ways, or laissez-faire capitalism, argues that that the social contract there is no difference between the social and the commercial contract. And certainly within our courts of law, there is no distinction between the social and the commercial contract. And because there is no distinction, I wonder if we have destroyed that vital concept of the common good within our democracy. In our political science theorists, our economic theorists, and maybe you'd like to begin, Mr. Baldwin.
Well, I go back to what I said a minute ago, Chris. I really believe that what we have here is a fraud. We have, we create money out of thin air. We create a fiat money supply that's backed by nothing. There's nothing of substance behind our supposed wealth. We've become the greatest debtor nation in the history of the world. We're $10 trillion in debt and growing. There's no end in sight, and the only answer that they can come up with is we got to borrow more money. My dad only had an 8th grade education. But I think, judging by what I see going on in this city today, I think my dad was smarter than most of the people on Capitol Hill and in Wall Street. My dad had a saying, and he said, son, if your outgo exceed your income, your upkeep will be your downfall.
And so how would you respond to the crisis that we're facing? What do you propose?
One of the first things I would propose I would like to appoint someone like Ron Paul, Secretary of the Treasury. And I would like to, as soon as possible, eliminate the Federal Reserve entirely. I would like to eliminate the Internal Revenue Service. I'd like to overturn the 16th Amendment and the income tax. I would like to put America on sound money once again. I believe that the federal government should lead the way in that. I believe that they should create an institution by which they only use sound money. I think the corporate world would soon follow suit if they would do that, because they would see the advantage of it.
So does that mean you oppose government intervention of any kind, whether to relieve people who are being foreclosed or bail out Wall Street?
I think we have to get back to the true free market. I really believe that, sure, there's some tough times that could come because of the situation that we now find ourselves. But look, we're either going to let the free market take over, and we're going to find ourselves then bottoming out, and then I think in a relatively short period of time coming back again, because the free market works. It always has, it always will.
Okay, let's let Mr. Nader take the last section here and respond to that. And if you could please tell us, Mr. Nader, what you propose to handle the collapse, the financial collapse we're facing.
Well, I just mentioned it. Re-regulation, deregulation under Clinton opened the doors to an orgy of excess and speculative behavior, as Richard Fisher, the head of the Federal Reserve Office in Dallas, said the other day. We need to give more power to the shareholders. The shareholders are supposed to control what they own, but they're told to sell out. They don't like the way the bosses are enriching themselves and running the company into the ground in a classic conflict of interest. And also, we need criminal prosecution, law and order. People are demanding justice for these corporate crooks in Wall Street and elsewhere. But the point that you raised, the social compact, every society that has subverted social values to commercial supremacy goes down. Every major religion in the world has urged many, many centuries ago its adherents not to give too much power to the merchant class. What we've seen in this country is a complete reverse. NAFTA and WTO are part of that. The subordination of civic values, health, safety, access to justice, etc., respect for posterity, to the supremacy of commercial values. And that is being installed in Washington, D.C., in state capitals, in city municipal centers. There's a quiet coup d'etat that's been going on, and the American people have got to wake up to it and do something about it.
Good. Well, let's move on to the next question, which revolves around the fact that both Senator McCain and Senator Obama